In the sprawling expanse of the galaxy, the name Nyx inspired terror across countless worlds. Known as the universe's top assassin, she was an unparalleled force, eliminating targets with surgical precision and a heart as cold as the void. No species, no empire, and no warlord had ever evaded her. But her latest mission brought her face to face with something she had never encountered: a human dad. Her target was a scientist hidden deep in the rural outskirts of Earth. Nyx expected another routine job: silent infiltration, swift elimination, and a clean escape. But the moment she crossed paths with a scientist's young daughter, she hesitated. The little girl's laughter and innocence stirred something buried deep within Nyx's programmed psyche. Then came the father, a man armed with nothing but an apron and a spatula, preparing pancakes for his daughter. His warmth and unwavering calm as he faced the assassin left Nyx bewildered. Here was a being unarmed, fragile by her standards, yet completely unafraid. As he spoke, not with fear but with compassion and curiosity, Nyx began to question her purpose. For the first time, Nyx found herself in an emotional conflict far deadlier than any battlefield. Could the universe's most feared killer change her path, or would her programming push her to finish the job? Nyx stood frozen, her hand hovering over the hilt of her plasma blade. The little girl, unaware of the tension in the room, tugged at her father's shirt and asked, "Daddy, is she staying for breakfast?" The father smiled, a calm and disarming gesture that made Nyx's neural processors spark with confusion. "I think our guest might need some pancakes," he said, turning back to the stove. His movements were deliberate, unthreatening, as if he were cooking for an old friend rather than the galaxy's deadliest assassin. Nyx's mind raced. Protocol demanded she act immediately, but something in the scene before her broke through the iron grip of her programming. The little girl offered her a tiny, hand-drawn picture of a family, two stick figures holding hands with a smaller one in the middle. "This is you now," the child said, smiling up at her. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Nyx, as a youngling on her war-torn homeworld, clutching a similar drawing, one she had long forgotten. The ache in her chest was unfamiliar, alien, and overwhelming. "You're not afraid of me?" Nyx finally asked, her voice low and mechanical. The father turned, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Fear doesn't change outcomes. Kindness might," he replied simply. The assassin's grip on her blade loosened. She sank into the nearest chair, the weight of years of bloodshed suddenly unbearable. The smells of warm pancakes and syrup filled the air, a sharp contrast to the sterile silence she was used to. For the first time in her existence, Nyx felt something stir, something more potent than fear or violence. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was another path for her, one not written in blood. Nyx stared at the plate of pancakes now set before her, golden and fluffy, drizzled with syrup. The little girl beamed, clearly proud of her father's cooking. Nyx's enhanced senses could detect no toxins or threats, just the honest aroma of a meal shared in peace. She hesitated, her hands unsure of what to do. "Go on," the father encouraged, sitting across from her. "They're best while they're warm." Nyx picked up the fork, her movements almost robotic, and took a small bite. The sweetness exploded on her tongue, so unlike the nutrient slurries she consumed during missions. For a moment, the assassin who had conquered worlds was silent, overtaken by the simplicity of a human breakfast. "What's her name?" the little girl asked, swinging her legs under the table. "Nyx," she replied without thinking. The father nodded. "Well, Nyx, welcome to our home. I'm Daniel, and this little whirlwind is Ellie." Ellie giggled, her wide eyes studying Nyx with fascination. "You're really tall. Are you a superhero?" The question caught Nyx off guard. A hero? She was the farthest thing from it. But as she looked into Ellie's innocent gaze, she couldn't bring herself to correct the child. Daniel leaned forward, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I don't know why you're here, but it seems like you needed this moment. You don't have to explain. Just know that we don't believe in violence here." His words cut deeper than any blade. For years, Nyx had defined herself by violence, by the lives she had taken, by the fear she instilled. Yet here was a man, vulnerable and unarmed, offering her not resistance but acceptance. Her internal systems alerted her to the time. The mission clock was ticking, her superiors likely monitoring her every move. Yet for the first time, she didn't care. "I was sent here to," Nyx began but faltered, her voice unsteady. Could she say it out loud? Could she admit she had come to destroy this? Daniel's gaze softened, as if he already knew. "Sometimes, the universe gives us a chance to change. Maybe this is yours." Nyx looked at Ellie, who had now climbed onto her lap, fearless and curious. "Are you staying forever?" the child asked. Nyx didn't answer immediately. For the first time in her life, she didn't know the answer. Nyx's gaze shifted to Ellie, who was now tugging on the edge of her cloak. The child's warmth was foreign, yet strangely comforting. For a fleeting moment, Nyx wondered what it would feel like to belong to something more than her reputation, more than the cold efficiency of her assignments. "I don't think I meant to stay," Nyx said softly, though her words felt hollow even to herself. "But why not?" Ellie tilted her head, her innocent question cutting through layers of Nyx's defenses. "You can help us build my treehouse. Daddy says we're going to start tomorrow." A treehouse. Nyx's neural systems struggled to process the simplicity of the concept. She had destroyed space stations, toppled regimes, and assassinated untouchable leaders, but she had never seen a treehouse. "You're safe here," Daniel added, his voice steady. "Whatever brought you to our doorstep doesn't have to follow you inside. You have a choice." Choice. The word echoed in Nyx's mind like a distant memory. Her life had been a series of orders, calculated and unflinching. But here, in this modest home with a child and her father, she was being offered something she had never been given, a chance to choose her own path. Her calm implant buzzed sharply in her ear, pulling her back to reality. "Agent Nyx," the voice of her superior crackled, cold and impatient. "Status report. Is the target neutralized?" Nyx froze. Ellie looked up at her expectantly, her small hands still clutching Nyx's cloak. Daniel didn't flinch, his calm eyes meeting hers as if daring her to make the call. "No," Nyx said after a long pause, her voice steady. "The mission is compromised." "Explain," the voice demanded, its edge sharper now. Nyx stood, gently setting Ellie aside. "The target is not a threat. Stand down." She tapped a button on her wrist to disable the transmission, cutting off her superior mid-response. The silence that followed was deafening, yet it felt like the first true moment of peace she had ever known. Daniel gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the weight of her decision. Ellie, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, grabbed Nyx's hand and pulled her toward the door. "Come on, Nyx. Let's go see the tree." Nyx hesitated, her instincts screaming that this was a mistake. But as Ellie's laughter rang through the air and Daniel watched with quiet trust, something inside her shifted. For once, she didn't feel like a weapon. As they stepped into the sunlight, Nyx allowed herself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a reason to stay. The warmth of the sunlight felt alien on Nyx's skin as Ellie led her to a towering oak tree in the backyard. Its branches stretched wide, forming a natural canopy that dappled the ground with light. Ellie ran ahead, her excitement uncontainable. "Look, this is where the treehouse will go." Ellie pointed to a thick branch halfway up the trunk. "Daddy says it'll have a ladder and a window so I can see the stars." Nyx tilted her head, gazing up at the branch. Her enhanced vision calculated the structure's stability, wind resistance, and load-bearing capacity in an instant. The assassin in her was still operational, analyzing every detail, but for once, it wasn't for destruction. "You've never seen a treehouse before?" Daniel asked as he approached, carrying a small toolbox. "No," Nyx admitted. Her voice was quieter now, almost uncertain. Daniel smiled and handed her a hammer. "Well, there's a first time for everything." Nyx stared at the tool, its simplicity baffling her. In her hands, she had held weapons capable of annihilating planets, but this, a mere hammer, felt heavier somehow. Ellie grabbed a handful of nails from the toolbox and handed them to Nyx. You can help me and Daddy. We're going to make it the best treehouse ever. Nyx knelt down to Ellie's level, her usually cold gaze softening. I don't know how to build a treehouse, she confessed. That's okay, Ellie said with a grin. Daddy says learning is the fun part. Daniel chuckled. She's right. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. Nyx nodded slowly. The idea of trying something without the pressure of perfection or survival was foreign to her, but she decided to follow their lead. As they worked together, the hours seemed to blur. Nyx found herself climbing the tree with Ellie's help, measuring beams under Daniel's guidance, and hammering nails into wood with the precision born of her assassin training. The treehouse began to take shape, a simple platform with railings, a ladder, and the beginnings of a roof. For the first time in her life, Nyx wasn't thinking about her next mission or her past. She was present in the moment, feeling the rough texture of wood, hearing Ellie's laughter, and watching the sun dip below the horizon. When they finally stopped to rest, the treehouse was far from complete, but it was real, a tangible creation born from their shared effort. Nyx sat on the ground, leaning against the tree, Ellie curled up beside her. Thank you, Nyx, Ellie murmured, her eyes heavy with sleep. You're the best superhero ever. Nyx felt a pang in her chest, something she couldn't quite name. She looked at Daniel, who gave her a quiet nod of approval. For the first time, she wondered if she could stay, not as a killer, but as something more. The stars began to emerge in the sky, and Nyx looked up, letting herself imagine a future she had never thought possible. As the stars glittered above, Nyx remained beneath the tree, Ellie sound asleep against her side. Daniel had gone inside to retrieve blankets, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The quiet of Earth's night was a stark contrast to the chaos she had always known, a life of shadows, orders, and silence broken only by the hum of weaponry. She glanced down at Ellie, her small face peaceful in sleep. A protective instinct, unfamiliar and raw, stirred within Nyx. This child, so fragile and trusting, had unknowingly dismantled the barriers Nyx had spent years constructing. Daniel returned, carrying a blanket and a thermos of something steaming. He spread the blanket over Ellie, tucking it around her gently. She has a way of making people feel like they belong, he said, sitting down beside Nyx. Nyx looked at him, her expression unreadable. She doesn't even know who I am. Maybe that's the point, Daniel replied, pouring a cup from the thermos and offering it to her. Ellie doesn't see what you've done. She sees who you are, at least who you could be. Nyx hesitated before accepting the cup. The warmth of the drink seeped into her hands, grounding her. What if I can't be that person? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her with the same unwavering calm that had disarmed her from the beginning. You already are. You're here. You're helping. And you chose not to hurt us when you could have. That's a start. Nyx stared into the darkness, the weight of his words settling over her. Could she really change? Could she rewrite the programming that had defined her existence? Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint buzz of her calm implant, reactivating itself despite her earlier attempts to disable it. A cold voice spoke directly into her mind. Nyx, you have failed to report. Termination protocols initiated. Her heart sank. Of course, they wouldn't let her walk away. The organization that had created her, trained her, and controlled her every move would not tolerate disobedience. Daniel noticed the shift in her demeanor. What's wrong? They're coming, Nyx said, standing abruptly. Her enhanced senses picked up the faint hum of an approaching ship. They won't let me leave. Daniel rose, calm but resolute. Then we'll stand together. Nyx shook her head. You don't understand. They'll kill anyone who gets in their way. Let them try, Daniel said firmly. This is our home, and we're not running. Ellie stirred, blinking sleepily. What's happening? Nyx knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Ellie, listen to me. I need you to stay with your dad. No matter what happens, you stay with him, okay? Ellie nodded, her small hand clutching Nyx's cloak. But you'll come back, right? Nyx hesitated, then nodded. I'll do everything I can. As the hum of the ship grew louder, Nyx stood, her plasma blade humming to life. For the first time, she wasn't fighting to fulfill a mission or to survive. She was fighting for something that mattered. The stars above seemed brighter as Nyx prepared to face the shadows of her past. The ship descended from the sky like a silent predator, its shape dark and menacing against the night. Nyx's mind raced, calculating the best strategy for defense, but she couldn't escape the growing feeling that her battle had shifted. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about protecting something far more precious than herself. Daniel stood beside her, his stance steady. "We'll make it through this," he said, his voice unwavering. Together, Nyx looked at him, realizing for the first time how much he believed in her. She had never felt the strength of unity like this before, never felt the support of someone who wasn't just an ally for survival, but a person willing to fight for something bigger. The ship landed softly, its hatch opening with a mechanical hiss. Figures clad in black tactical armor stepped out, their eyes glowing cold blue beneath their helmets. They were silent at first, scanning the surroundings with clinical precision. One of them spoke, his voice sharp and commanding. "Nyx, your disobedience has been noted. You're coming with us." Nyx stepped forward, placing herself between the soldiers and Daniel and Ellie. "I don't think so." The soldier's voice grew colder. "Step aside, assassin. You can't protect them forever." Ellie's voice broke the tension, small but clear. "Leave her alone." The soldiers faltered for just a moment, their attention momentarily shifting to the child's brave defiance. Nyx seized the opportunity, moving faster than they could react. She lunged at the closest soldier, her plasma blade cutting through the air with precision. The soldier barely managed to raise his weapon, but Nyx's strike was too quick. The blade slashed through the gun, then cut through the soldier's armor, disabling him with a swift, flawless motion. Another soldier aimed at her, but Daniel's calm voice rang out. "Get down." Nyx ducked instinctively as Daniel tossed a heavy metal tool at the soldier, knocking him off balance. It wasn't a weapon, but it was enough. Nyx's body moved on instinct, her training kicking in. She fought with ruthless efficiency, but this time, it wasn't just about executing a mission. This time, it was about protecting the people who had shown her a different path. As she dispatched another soldier, the remaining troops hesitated. The fear wasn't just from Nyx's deadly precision. It was from her refusal to follow orders, from her rebellion against the very force that had once controlled her. One soldier stepped forward, holding his weapon high. "We've been ordered to bring you in dead or alive." Nyx didn't hesitate. She stood tall, meeting the soldier's gaze. "Then come and get me." In that moment, something inside her clicked. She was no longer just the assassin. She was something more. She was a protector. The battle raged on, but Nyx fought with a ferocity fueled by something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Daniel and Ellie moved quickly, staying close but out of the way, offering support when needed. Daniel was resourceful, using whatever he could find to create obstacles for the soldiers. Ellie, though too young to fight, had her own way of helping. She distracted them when they least expected it, throwing small rocks and making enough noise to create openings for Nyx to strike. The soldiers were relentless, but so was Nyx. She had once been the apex predator, but now she was fighting for something far greater than any mission. One by one, the soldiers fell back, overwhelmed by the unexpected resistance. They had come to capture an assassin, but they were faced with something they hadn't anticipated, a force of nature unwilling to bend. When the last soldier retreated, Nyx lowered her blade, her breath coming in heavy gasps. She turned to Daniel and Ellie, their eyes filled with admiration and awe. "You did it," Daniel said, his voice filled with awe. Nyx's gaze softened. "No." "We did it." Ellie ran up to her, wrapping her arms around Nyx's legs. "I knew you were a superhero." Nyx smiled, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel. She looked up at the stars, a future unfolding before her, one where she wasn't just a weapon, but a person capable of change. As the night settled around them, Nyx realized that the mission was no longer to eliminate her target. It was to protect what she had found, a family, a chance for redemption, and a life free from the chains of her past. And for the first time, she wasn't running from who she had been. She was choosing who she wanted to become. The morning after the battle arrived quietly, the distant hum of the retreating ship barely audible as it vanished into the atmosphere. The silence felt like a new beginning, a moment of peace Nyx had never thought possible. Ellie had insisted they celebrate their victory by finishing the treehouse, so the following day was filled with laughter and construction. Nyx found herself more engaged than ever, hammering nails and securing beams, her focus shifting entirely from the shadows of her past to the present moment. Daniel worked alongside her, his steady presence reassuring, as though he had always believed in her potential to change. But it wasn't just him. Ellie's joy and unrelenting optimism began to chip away at the walls Nyx had built around herself, making her question the very foundations of her existence. With every nail driven into the wood, Nyx began to understand the power of building something from scratch, not just a structure, but a future. A future where she wasn't defined by her past, but by the choices she made moving forward. By the time the sun began to dip low in the sky, the treehouse had taken shape, far from perfect, but filled with the love and effort of a family who had embraced her without question. As the three of them stood beneath the treehouse, looking up at their creation, Nyx felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the mission she had once lived for, nor the perfection of a flawless kill. It was something far more profound, the feeling of belonging. "How's it look?" Daniel asked, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Nyx stepped back and took in the sight of the treehouse, a modest yet beautiful structure nestled within the branches. It had no sleek technology, no weapons, just simple wood, nails, and the promise of new memories to be made. "It's perfect," Nyx said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Ellie clapped her hands in excitement. "I knew it. I told you we could do it." Nyx smiled at the child, her heart swelling with a tenderness she had never allowed herself to feel. "You were right, Ellie. We did it together." Daniel stepped forward and clapped Nyx on the back. "You're one of us now, Nyx. You've earned your place here." Nyx looked up at the stars, the same ones she had once seen as distant and cold, like her mission objectives. But now, they felt different, closer, warmer, and full of possibility. For the first time, she felt free. Free from the chains of her past, from the expectations of her former life. The quiet hum of a new life was settling in, and for the first time in years, Nyx wasn't running from anything. She was standing still, choosing her own path. In the distance, the night skies sparkled with the promise of stars yet to be explored, new beginnings yet to be forged. Nyx took a deep breath, the weight of her old life slipping away with each exhale. She wasn't the universe's top assassin anymore. She was Nyx, a protector, a friend, and, for the first time, a part of something greater than herself. And as the stars twinkled above her, Nyx finally knew what it felt like to belong. As the days turned into weeks, Nyx found herself more deeply embedded in the rhythm of this new life. The simplicity of it was almost overwhelming at times, the steady pace of daily chores, the warmth of shared meals, and the sound of Ellie's laughter echoing through the house. It was everything she had never known, and yet, it felt more real than any of the missions she had once executed with such precision. She spent her mornings working on the treehouse with Ellie, teaching her how to use a hammer with care, showing her how to measure wood with accuracy. Ellie had a natural curiosity that made even the smallest task seem like an adventure. She wasn't just learning how to build a treehouse. She was learning how to live with purpose, how to connect with others, and how to embrace the beauty of simplicity. Daniel, too, had his moments of quiet reflection. He would occasionally catch Nyx's gaze from across the room, a small smile of encouragement always in place. He knew she was still processing everything, the weight of her past, the uncertainty of her future. But he never pushed. He was content to let her move at her own pace, trusting that the bond they had formed would guide her forward. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. You've given us so much, Nyx. You've protected us, stood by us, and fought for this life. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. Nyx glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I don't understand. You don't have to carry the burden of your past by yourself. Not with us. We're a family now. He paused, looking at Ellie, who was chasing fireflies nearby. And families share their burdens? Nyx felt a lump form in her throat. She had never been part of a family before. She had been an instrument, cold, detached, and ruthless. But here, in this quiet home, she was beginning to understand what it meant to be something more. Ellie returned to them, her hands full of glowing fireflies. Look, Nyx. I caught them for you. Nyx's heart clenched at the sight of the child's excitement. She took the jar from Ellie, her fingers brushing against the delicate creatures inside. They're beautiful, Nyx said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ellie beamed. They're magic, right? Like you? The child's words struck Nyx to the core. She had always seen herself as a force of destruction, a harbinger of fear. But Ellie, with her innocent wonder, saw something different in her, something she had never allowed herself to see. They're not magic, Ellie, Nyx said, looking at the glowing insects in her hands. But they remind me of something just as important. What's that? Ellie asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Hope, Nyx answered, her gaze fixed on the fireflies. Hope that no matter how dark it gets, there's always something that can light the way. Daniel watched them both with a gentle smile, his heart swelling with pride. This was it. This was the family they had built, not out of blood, but out of choice, trust, and love. And Nyx had become a part of it, not because she was forced to, but because she had chosen it. The fireflies danced in the jar, their tiny bodies glowing with the promise of something beautiful, something that could endure, even in the darkness. Nyx held the jar close to her chest, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. For the first time, she truly understood the meaning of family. It wasn't about perfection or what had come before. It was about the future they built together, step by step, moment by moment. And as the night settled in, Nyx finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of that future, one where she wasn't the universe's top assassin, but a protector, a mother figure, and a friend. She wasn't defined by the lives she had taken. She was defined by the ones she had chosen to save. As the seasons changed, Nyx found herself settling into a new rhythm, one that felt almost foreign, yet deeply satisfying. The quiet moments she had once considered weakness now filled her with a strange sense of peace. She began to cherish the simple acts of life, the mornings spent working on the garden, the evenings spent reading to Ellie, and the nights when the three of them would sit around the dinner table, sharing stories and laughter. Daniel had become her anchor. His unshakable belief in the goodness of the world, even after everything he had seen, grounded her. He never judged her for her past. Instead, he celebrated the small victories, like the way she would smile more often or the way she learned to trust herself again. Ellie continued to be the heart of the house. Her boundless energy and curiosity kept Nyx on her toes, and it was through Ellie's innocent questions that Nyx began to rediscover the beauty of life. Ellie often asked about the stars, and sometimes Nyx would tell her stories of far-off planets, ancient civilizations, and heroes who had fought for justice. But the greatest lesson she had learned from Ellie was that heroism wasn't defined by power or might. It was defined by love, sacrifice, and standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. It was on one such evening, while they were stargazing on the porch, that Daniel brought up something that had been weighing on his mind. Nyx, he began, his voice gentle yet serious. I've been thinking a lot lately. Nyx turned to him, waiting for him to continue. She had learned to listen to him, to trust him in ways she never had with anyone else. You've given us everything, Daniel said, his voice filled with warmth. But you've never really shared your story with us. You've always kept your past locked away. You don't have to go into detail if it's too much, but we want to understand. We want to know you, not just the assassin, but you. Nyx felt a tightness in her chest. For years, her story had been one of blood and shadows, of loneliness and survival. She had kept it hidden, locked away in the deepest corners of her mind, afraid that if she spoke of it, it would unravel everything she had built here. But as she looked at Daniel and Ellie, their faces filled with trust and acceptance, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was time to let them in. Maybe it was time to heal, to confront the ghosts that still haunted her. "I'll tell you," Nyx said quietly, her voice steady. "But only if you're sure you want to hear it." Daniel nodded without hesitation. "We're family. We want to know all of you, not just the parts you're comfortable with." Ellie, sitting beside her, reached for Nyx's hand. "We love you, Nyx. All of you." The words hit Nyx like a wave. She had never been told she was loved for who she was. No one had ever accepted her without judgment. In her past, love had been a weapon, a tool to manipulate. But here, with Daniel and Ellie, it was something pure, something real. Nyx took a deep breath, and the story began to spill out. The cold training she had endured, the countless missions she had been sent on, the dark choices she had made to survive. But she also spoke of the moments when she had questioned it all, when she had wondered if there was more to life than just following orders, than just being a weapon. She spoke of the day she had walked away from the organization, the moment when she had made the decision to turn her back on everything she had known. As she spoke, she realized that telling them her story didn't make her weak. It didn't erase the past, but it didn't define her anymore either. The people who mattered most to her weren't afraid of what she had done. They saw her for who she was now, the person who had chosen to be better, who had chosen love over violence. When Nyx finished speaking, the silence that followed was comforting, not uncomfortable. Daniel reached out and placed his hand on hers, his grip strong and steady. "You don't have to be defined by your past," Daniel said softly. "What matters is who you choose to be now. And you've chosen to be someone extraordinary." Ellie, who had listened with wide, innocent eyes, leaned over and hugged Nyx tightly. "You're still my superhero, Nyx," she whispered. Nyx felt tears sting her eyes, but they were different this time. They weren't tears of regret or sorrow. They were tears of relief, of finally letting go of the weight she had carried for so long. "Thank you," Nyx said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me." That night, as Nyx lay in bed, she realized that her journey was far from over. She had fought battles before, but this battle, this one for herself, had been the hardest. And yet, she had won. She had found a family who accepted her, a purpose beyond her past, and a future that was no longer defined by violence. The stars outside the window seemed brighter than ever. For the first time, Nyx truly believed they could be a guide, not just to the vast unknown, but to the life she was building, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a new beginning. As the months passed, Nyx's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Her mornings no longer began with the sharp, cold edge of her past, but with the warmth of purpose. She found herself waking up before the sun, not out of duty or necessity, but because she had learned to love the quiet moments of the dawn, when everything felt new and full of promise. She continued to help Ellie build the treehouse, but now it wasn't just about construction. It was about creating a space where Ellie could dream, where they could share stories, and where, someday, they could look back and see how far they had come together. Every board they nailed into place was a reminder that they were building a future, not just a structure. Daniel, ever the calm presence in their lives, began to notice changes in Nyx. She was more open, more willing to share her thoughts and ideas. She had stopped hiding her emotions behind cold walls. And though there were still moments when she would retreat into silence, he could see the shift. She was learning to trust again. Trust not just in them, but in herself. It was a quiet afternoon when everything would change again. Nyx was sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when the faint hum of a ship's engines cut through the stillness. Her eyes narrowed instinctively, her body tensing. She had lived her entire life with an awareness of every sound, every shift in the air. The hum of an approaching ship was a sound she had never been able to ignore, no matter how much she wanted to. The ship descended slowly, its shape familiar but still foreign. Nyx stood, her hand instinctively moving to where her plasma blade had once been kept, though it wasn't there anymore. She had given it up, symbolically and literally. She was no longer that person. Daniel, noticing her shift in posture, stood beside her. "Is something wrong?" Nyx didn't answer at first. She simply watched as the ship's hatch opened and figures began to disembark. Their movements were swift, efficient, military-like in their precision. But these weren't the same soldiers who had tried to capture her before. They were different, more controlled, more calculated. One of them stepped forward, his face partially obscured by a helmet.
"Nyx,
"You've been away for too long." His voice was cold, robotic. "The organization requires your return." Nyx's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of her past pulling at her. The soldier's tone grew harder. "You have no choice. You will come with us, or we will take you by force. You belong to us, and you know it." Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between Nyx and the soldiers. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm but not confrontational. "You're not taking her. She's with us now." Ellie had joined them, standing next to Nyx, her eyes wide but filled with determination. "Go away," she said, her small voice carrying more strength than Nyx could have ever expected from a child. "You can't take Nyx. She's our family." The soldiers looked at each other, a flicker of uncertainty passing between them. They had not expected resistance. But they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to retrieve Nyx, and they would do whatever it took. Nyx's heart raced as she took a step forward, placing herself beside Daniel and Ellie. This time, she wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting them, the family she had chosen. "You don't understand," Nyx said, her voice cold, the assassin within her stirring. "I am not the weapon you trained. I am not yours anymore." The leader of the soldiers hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, this time with more force. "You've made a mistake, Nyx. You cannot escape us. The organization will always find you." Nyx clenched her fists. She had spent years running, always in the shadows, always fighting to survive. But this time, she wasn't running. She wasn't fighting to survive. She was fighting for something worth protecting. Daniel and Ellie stood with her, unwavering. They weren't afraid. They were ready to stand by her, no matter what came next. The soldiers advanced, but Nyx moved first, faster than any of them could react. Her movements were fluid, sharp, a reflection of everything she had once been, but now focused for a different purpose. With one swift motion, she disarmed the nearest soldier, taking his weapon and turning it against the others. But this time, she didn't kill. She incapacitated. She knocked them out, rendering them unconscious, without taking a single life. When the last soldier fell to the ground, Nyx stood over them, breathing heavily, her heart pounding. She had done what was necessary to protect her family. But something had changed in her, something deeper than just the fight. She realized she had no desire to end lives anymore. She wasn't a weapon. She was a protector. She turned to Daniel and Ellie, who had watched the whole exchange in silence. Ellie ran up to her, wrapping her arms around Nyx's waist. "You did it! You're amazing!" Nyx smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. "I did it for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For both of you." Daniel approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're part of us, Nyx. No matter what they say, no matter what they try to do. You belong here. With us." Nyx's eyes drifted to the fallen soldiers, then back to the horizon. This wasn't the end. The organization would not simply forget about her, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had something worth fighting for now. Something real. And as she stood there, with her family by her side, Nyx knew that no matter what came next, she was ready. They had built this life together, and nothing, no one, was going to take it from them.